Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We talk a lot on the show about how quickly things are changing in the world, and today we're going to kind of zoom out and look at the big picture, like the global power structure and where it seems to be headed.
Yeah, from what we can tell from all these experts and sources that we've been looking at, it really seems like we could be on the verge of a major shift in the world order, like the kind of shift that only happens every few decades.
Yeah, it's a big topic for sure.
Yeah.
So to kind of set the stage, it seems like things really started to change back in 2017. Remember that? You had Trump getting inaugurated right at the same time that all those world leaders and CEOs were meeting in Davos for the World Economic Forum.
Oh, yeah, that was symbolic, wasn't it? Almost like two completely different worlds colliding. You had the Davos crowd representing, globalism, free trade, international cooperation, all that. And then you had Trump with his America First agenda basically saying, nope, not doing that anymore.
Right. It was a big departure, and it seems like it really shook things up.
Yeah.
So can we back up for a second, define some terms here? What exactly is this liberal international order that everyone keeps talking about? It sounds kind of academic and jargony.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, for sure. Basically, it's the system of rules and institutions that have been running the world since World War II. It's all about things like free trade democracy, human rights, and the idea that countries should work together to solve problems, multilateralism, all of that.
Yeah.
The U.S. has been like the main architect and defender of this system for decades.
Okay, so it's like the operating system for the planet. And it's been working pretty well for a long time, right? So
Yeah.
why are we seeing it challenged now? What's changed?
Well, a lot of things have changed, but one of the big ones is the rise of what are called revisionist powers.
Revisionist powers. Sounds kind of ominous. What exactly does that mean?
Basically, it means countries that aren't happy with the current world order. They want to change it to benefit themselves, even if it means breaking the rules or challenging the status quo.
Okay, got it. So who are we talking about here? Who are the big revisionist powers?
Well, China's a prime example. Look at what they're doing in the South China Sea, building those artificial islands, claiming territory that isn't theirs. They're basically saying, we don't care about the rules, we're going to do what we want.
Right. They're definitely flexing their muscles these days.
Yeah.
So it's not just about Trump and his America First thing then. There are bigger forces at play.
Exactly. Trump was a symptom of a much larger shift that's been happening for a while. The world is moving away from a unipolar system where the U.S. is the only superpower. And it's becoming more multipolar with multiple centers of power. And that's making a lot of people nervous, especially America's allies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they've been relying on the U.S. for security and economic stability for decades.
Right, and then suddenly you've got Trump threatening tariffs, questioning NATO, and basically telling everyone you're on your own. It was a huge wake-up call for America's allies.
I remember Chrystia Freeland, Canada's former finance minister, being really vocal about this. She was warning about the dangers of aggressive economic nationalism and the possibility of a trade war.
Yeah, she was definitely sounding the alarm, and for good reason. I mean, this new unpredictability from the U.S. really threw everyone off balance. They were like, what do we do now? How do we protect our interests when the most powerful country in the world is going rogue?
Right. It was a real dilemma. So what did they do? How did they respond to this new reality?
Well, it varied. Some tried to reason with Trump, hoping they could negotiate a better deal. Others just held their breath and hoped for the best. And some, like Japan, were really hesitant to rock the boat too much.
It sounds like everyone was trying to figure out what Trump's game was. Was he really trying to blow up the system, or was he just trying to get a better deal for America?
That was the big question, wasn't it? And honestly, I don't think anyone really knew the answer, not even Trump himself, maybe.
So while all this drama was unfolding with America and its allies, how were other players reacting? What about Russia and China? They must have been watching all this with great interest.
Oh, yeah. They were definitely paying attention. While everyone else was scrambling, they saw an opportunity. They saw a chance to advance their own agendas while the U.S. was distracted and its alliances were fraying.
Okay, so let's talk about them one at a time. What was Russia's angle in all of this?
Well, Putin's goal has always been to make Russia a great power again. He wants to regain influence over what he sees as Russia's rightful sphere of influence, especially in places like Ukraine. Remember those demands he made before the war? Pulling NATO forces out of Eastern Europe, basically undoing decades of Western expansion?
Right. He wants to redraw the map of Europe and reassert Russia's dominance.
Exactly. And then you've got China with their own ambitions.
So what are China's goals? I mean, we talked about the South China Sea, but they're aiming bigger than that, right?
Oh, yeah. Much bigger. Their ultimate goal is to be the dominant power in Asia, and they're not shy about pursuing that goal. We see it in their economic policies, their military buildup, their assertive diplomacy. They're playing the long game, and they're playing it very well.
So we've got this situation where the U.S. is stepping back from global leadership. Russia is trying to reshape Europe, and China is aiming for dominance in Asia. It sounds like we're headed for a very different world.
That's putting it mildly. And the scary part is that nobody knows exactly how it's all going to play out. The experts we've been reading have actually come up with 5 potential scenarios for how this new world order might shake out.
5 scenarios. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's hear it.
All right, so scenario number 1 is called a new great power bargain. It's basically the idea that the U.S. could decide to cut deals with both Russia and China, like a kind of grand bargain to stabilize the world.
So it'd be like dividing up the world into spheres of influence. Each country gets its own backyard to play in.
Yeah, kind of like that. The U.S. might say, okay, Russia, you can have Eastern Europe, just don't mess with us in the West. And China, you can be the big dog in Asia as long as you don't try to push us out of the Pacific.
But what about all the other countries? What happens to America's allies, like in Europe and Asia?
That's one of the big questions with this scenario. Some experts think that the U.S. might be willing to sacrifice those alliances in order to secure its own interests. It would be a major shift, and it would definitely leave a lot of countries feeling pretty vulnerable.
Yeah, that doesn't sound great for them.
Okay.
What's scenario number 2?
Scenario number 2 is war by accident.
Uh-oh. That sounds even worse.
Yeah, it's not a happy one. The idea here is that with all these tensions and rivalries simmering, the risk of miscalculation goes way up. You could have a situation where a small incident like a border skirmish or a cyber attack spirals out of control, and suddenly you've got a major war on your hands.
So it's not that anyone wants a war, but they might stumble into one by mistake.
Exactly. It's like those close calls we had during the Cold War where we came dangerously close to nuclear war. It's a reminder that things can escalate very quickly when you've got these kinds of rivalries.
Okay, that's pretty scary. What's the next scenario?
The third scenario is anarchy in a leaderless world. This one's kind of the doomsday scenario.
Oh, great. So basically the world goes to hell in a handbasket.
Pretty much. In this scenario, the U.S. retreats from the world stage, but nobody steps up to fill the void. There's no global cop, no one to enforce the rules or mediate disputes. It's a world of every country for itself, with constant conflict, economic chaos, and a breakdown of international cooperation.
Okay, I'm officially depressed now. Let's move on to something a little less bleak.
All right, well, scenario number 4 is globalization without America.
So in this one, the U.S. goes its own way, but the rest of the world figures things out.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. The U.S. becomes more isolated, but the rest of the world continues to integrate and cooperate. You might see the EU taking on a bigger role, China and India becoming more assertive, and new economic and political alliances forming that don't involve the U.S.
So the U.S. is still powerful, but it's no longer the center of the universe.
Right. It's like the U.S. becomes a big fish in a small pond, while the rest of the world is swimming in the ocean.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got one scenario where the great powers divide up the world, one where they accidentally destroy it, one where everything falls apart, and one where the U.S. gets left behind. What's the last one?
The 5th scenario is America first succeeds.
Okay, so is this the happy ending?
Well, it depends on your definition of happy. In this scenario, the policies advocated by the America First crowd actually work. The U.S. economy thrives, its military is unmatched, and it uses its power to get what it wants from both its rivals and its allies.
So it's a strong America, but maybe not a very cooperative one.
Right. It's a world where the U.S. might be prosperous and secure, but it's also more unilateral and less interested in working with others. It's basically America First on steroids.
Wow, these are some pretty wild scenarios. So how do we make sense of all this? Which one is most likely to happen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Honestly, no one knows for sure. The future is unpredictable, but the point of exploring these scenarios isn't to predict the future. It's to help us understand the forces that are shaping the world and to think critically about the choices we face.
So it's about being aware of the possibilities and being prepared for anything.
Exactly. And I think what makes this even more interesting is that it's not just about what governments and leaders do. It's also about the role that individuals like you and me can play in shaping this new world order.
Okay, so we've got these 5 scenarios.
Yeah.
You know, the bargain, the war, the anarchy, the going it alone, and the America First winning. So much to think about. You know, it's kind of overwhelming when you start thinking about all the different ways things could go.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a lot to process. But, you know, the good news is that none of these scenarios are inevitable. The future isn't set in stone. We have choices to make both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, I like the sound of that. But, you know, it's hard to see how, like, what I do or what any one person does could actually make a difference in all of this. I mean, we're talking about global forces, huge trends that seem way beyond our control.
Yeah, I hear you. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of all this. But the truth is that we do have agency. We can make a difference. It starts with understanding the issues, like we're doing right now in this deep dive. The more we know about these complex challenges, the better equipped we are to engage with them, to have informed conversations, to challenge assumptions, to advocate for solutions.
Right, so knowledge is power. Like, the more we understand, the more we can actually do something about it.
Exactly. And beyond just being informed, we can also support organizations that are working to make a difference. There are tons of NGOs and think tanks out there doing amazing work on these issues, whether it's promoting diplomacy, preventing conflict, or fostering international cooperation.
Yeah, I've been meaning to look into that more. It's just hard to know where to start sometimes. But it sounds like there are a lot of options out there.
There are. And, we can also make a difference in our own communities. Just by talking about these issues with our friends and family, sharing what we're learning, encouraging people to think critically about the world around them, it all adds up.
So it's about raising awareness, getting people to pay attention to these global shifts and how they might impact our lives.
Exactly. And it's also about holding our leaders accountable. We can write to our elected officials, attend town hall meetings, make our voices heard on issues that matter to us. We can demand that they prioritize diplomacy and cooperation, that they put global engagement ahead of narrow self-interest.
So it's about using our voices, our votes, our wallets to support a more peaceful and cooperative world order.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive bystanders in this. We're active participants, and our choices matter.
It's a call to action, a reminder that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank you for such a stimulating conversation. It's been a real pleasure exploring these complex issues with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the future of global power. Remember, the future isn't preordained. It's up to all of us to shape it.